Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. Carasoft Technology would like to welcome you to our ServiceNow Federal Tech Talk, FBI Insights on Ransomware Prevention and Defense for Federal Agencies. At this time, I'd like to hand the floor over to our speakers. Jason, the floor is all yours.
Thanks, Heather, and thanks everybody for joining today. I think this is going to be an informative session that hopefully you walk away and you've got a better understanding of the landscape of ransomware. James, would you like to provide a brief introduction of kind of your title, what your role is at the FBI, and kind of how you're responding to some cybersecurity events?
Yes, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining. My name is Supervisory Special Agent James Cheeks, and I work here at the Washington Field Office. In the Washington Field Office, we have multiple cyber squads that work the cyber threat. My group particularly works the threats from Asia. And what we do is we do a number of things. One, we have investigations against the cyber nation-state threat actors. And the role of the FBI in this is to pose risk and consequences. So we're identifying who the actors are, collecting the evidence, and then providing that evidence ultimately for an indictment, and which will allow the U.S. government to then determine what the next steps are for them. So on a daily basis, we're working these investigations, but we're also doing a lot of victim notifications. We're notifying victims that we come across in the course of our investigations, but also victims that come across in investigations of other cyber investigations across the FBI. Because we're in the Washington area of operation, the Washington, D.C. area, there's a lot of government agencies in this area, which are a big target for cyber criminals as well as nation states. So whenever there's a victim from an investigation, my team will go out there and be the person that knocks on the door and provides the information or makes a phone call and make sure we get in a secure manner, anything to help those victims out, whether it's indicators of compromise, TPPs, or anything that can assist them. So that's what we do on a daily basis.
Thanks, James. And so I'm Jason Beland. I am a Solution Sales Executive here at ServiceNow. I have over 20 years of technical consulting, specifically around networking, digital forensics, and cybersecurity. So I've consulted for some of the largest federal and commercial agencies out there. So I've seen a lot, moved into a sales role over the last 10 years. So it gives me the opportunity to stay current with the latest technologies. And I appreciate everybody joining today. So as I was doing research for this particular tech talk, well aware of the ransomware threats out there, but some of the numbers and some of the things that I found are actually jaw-dropping. So obviously ransomware attacks have been increasing significantly. It's reported that September had the record number of ransomware attacks in 2023, and that's significant over just what we saw over the last couple of years. According to the NCC group, ransomware groups launched about 514 attacks in September, which surpassed the previous high of 459 attacks in March of 2023. And here's some statistics that really opened up my eyes. That nearly 50% of the breaches in the first half of 2022 had stolen credentials. 80% of those who paid were victims of a second attack. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about that. At the time, 5.12 million was the total average cost of a ransomware attack. This is from 2021. And then 68% of victims of ransomware attacks who paid once were hit again within less than a month with higher ransom. And then there was a 33% increase in ransomware attacks over 2021. So AI-driven ransomware is likely to become more prevalent, and the attackers are using machine learning to identify targets and vulnerable items. Additionally, these attackers are more likely to be use more sophisticated methods to evade detection, such as using multiple layers of encryption and obfuscation. So we're going to a question and answer session with Agent Cheeks. So these are some of the questions that came up through my colleagues and some of our customers. James, can you provide some examples of recent ransomware attacks that had significant impact on agencies, and what lessons were learned from these incidents?
Sure. We had several. We had the Lockpick and the Bakut ransomware back in 2021 that was worked out of our field office in Newark, New Jersey. And these were, we believe, were developed by Mikhail Mativ. And this individual deployed these along with the Hive ransomware. And one of the victims was the MPD, the Metropolitan Police Department, here in Washington, D.C. The FBI was able to get an indictment on that individual in December of 2022. Another big case was the Hive ransomware group. They had over $130 million worth of ransom demands, target over 1,500 victims, over 80 countries. And those victims were, hospitals, governments, financial firms, critical infrastructure, schools. And the FBI was able to penetrate that group in 2022 and steal the encryption keys, the decryption keys. So with those decryption keys, we were able to, once we identify the victim, was quickly give them a call and provide them the keys before they paid the ransomware. That is a best case and a great success story, but that's not always the case where we're able to get those keys. So that highlights one of the lessons learned of notifying the FBI early. Notifying us early, we'll be able to identify, is this a ransomware variant that we're familiar with and we have information on, that we can in turn share TTPs, IOCs that can pinpoint the victim to identify where the vector of intrusion was and to start working their remediation plan. And then in some cases, and Hive isn't the only one where we're able to get the decryption keys. If we have them, we will provide them so that the victim can avoid paying the ransomware and can get back online. What we see, you brought out the statistics early on, it's not going away. Ransomware is very lucrative and they're only going to get better at it. And what we see is the lesson learned is some of the things are prevalent is the patching, the basic hygiene, and that the first few hours are critical. Sometimes, especially the smaller organizations, large organizations have a very robust cybersecurity team where the smaller ones don't, and they may feel that they have a handle on it. And then once, they spend a day on it and then they start reaching out, there's valuable time that is lost. Another lesson learned is the backups. The backups don't always work. So when you have your plan and you're working your incident response plan and your test plan, test the backups to make sure that everything is configured properly, so that when you go back online using the backups, they're actually available for you to use. Another thing is with those lessons is know what's on your network. Know what legacy systems you still have connected. Make sure that you're inviting the right people to the table when you do reach out to law enforcement, that it's not just the figurehead or the CEO or the president or the VP, that you actually have your subject matter experts that can speak to your network configuration, that can speak to how things are configured, what's on your network, and then what the plan is. Sometimes that stuff gets lost in translations because the higher ups may not be familiar with the details on how things actually work. And that's where the problems need to be solved, is at the network level. So those are some of the lessons learned when working those investigations.
Okay, that's interesting. So how frequently is the FBI able to get the decryption keys? You said it was rare, or it's not always something you could do, but do you have a high success rate at that? And if not, what really are the options for an agency or a organization to rebuild from if they're not willing to pay the ransom?
If they're not willing to pay the ransom, their options are using their backups if they have them, and if depending on if they had an offline copy, because sometimes depending on how you had it configured, that could be corrupted as well. So their options are to restore back to their best copy of what they have. Another option for them is to reach out and see sometimes what a third-party remediation company that comes in. They may have information that they learned from another victim that was a customer, and sometimes they can connect those two after an agreement between the victims to have a discussion. I've seen that happen as well. So if they're not paying the ransom, you want to make sure that you have your backups and you can be able to restore. Here at the FBI, we don't advocate for paying the ransom because that just encourages, plus you're lining their pockets for them to continue to do so. But that's a business decision. We won't tell you which way to go. That's something that the leaders or the organization have to make that decision. We just ask if the ransom is going to be paid, just reach out and let us know. And then from there, we can try to, whatever information we have based on success or non-success of other victims, we can provide that information to you so you have all the information available as you make that decision.
Okay. And from what I understand, CISA, Congress passed a law, the SERC law, back in 2022, where CISA is going to be taking, if you do pay ransom, you're supposed to report to them. Is that an agency that you do cross communication with to get and share information between the CISA and the FBI?
We do communicate between agencies and other agencies, but I would suggest is when you're reaching out to reach out to both agencies. We have different missions. For us, when you look at President's Directive 41, PPD 41, our responsibilities, for incident response versus CISA, which is remediation. We're not going to remediate it. So that's somebody you want to reach out to is CISA. But when it comes to identifying the actors, that's somebody you want to do in parallel because we could provide you indicators of compromise, TTPs, and based off experience. When we're talking about ransomware, these ransomwares are different variants. So they kind of evolve just like a virus would evolve, for humans, right? So as the different variants come out, we assign it to different field offices so they become the subject matter experts. So by calling both, you make sure that both are notified and both can get working on their respective piece of the pie that's going to help your organization. Sometimes when you just reach out to one, there could be a delay or an assumption that the other one knows, and then time is lost again. The critical hours are in the beginning. So you want to reach out to both contacts.
No, that's great. Good information. And it sounds like time truly is the enemy. In your experience, what are some of the common vulnerabilities or weak points that cyber criminals are exploiting to execute ransomware attacks? And, how can agencies better safeguard against them?
The top three is RDP, remote desktop, email phishing, and then software vulnerabilities. And just like everything else, these are known, and it's been like that for years. Especially in the COVID, you see a spike of people working remotely. So when you're using RDP, doesn't mean don't use it. It's just the company should be aware of what the risk and vulnerabilities are by using RDP, and then have mitigations in place. You don't have to have every port open, just like with everything else. You gotta make sure things are configured right, and that applies to everything. A lot of times people think they're safe. That we have firewalls, we have an IDS, they have all the equipment, the latest ones on the market. But if they're not configured properly, that's not going to protect you the way you think it is. So RDP, having an account lockout, because sometimes they're brute force. The actors are trying to get in. Email phishing, we're trained to look for spelling errors and mistakes and bad grammar. That was really a case years ago. Nowadays, they outsource that duty, right? So they're resourceful. They run a business. So it may be someone in the U.S. that's crafting this for an organization out of Nigeria. So don't always expect that you're going to find mistakes with the email phishing, and keep training your people not to click. And you're doing those tests, try them all hours. Because if you send somebody an email 7 o'clock in the morning, they're not going to be as savvy as they are at 9, 10 o'clock after they had that cup of coffee. So don't just test in the day, test at all times to make sure that the message is getting across for email phishing. And then software vulnerabilities, patching as soon as possible. As you know, with 0 days, there's a time before the 0 day where the actors who have discovered the vulnerability are already using it. And then once that 0 day has been communicated to the world, they're now rushing to use it before anybody gets a patch, because an IT person may not patch right away. They want to test it, make sure that it's not going to make their network unstable. So their bad actors are counting on that lag where that software vulnerability has been identified, and they're going to keep attacking. And then a lot of times what we see is the company be compromised by a vulnerability that was discovered and a patch was issued 6 months or a year before. So they will go back and check to see who hasn't updated, who hasn't patched. And so it's not just because of the 0 day was communicated on January 1st. They'll be January 1st, 2 years later, and they'll try the same patch, and they always find someone.
Okay, no, that's great. So it sounds like it's there needs to be a good mix of technology, but then also end user training to make sure that the user's not inviting the bad actor into the organization. What would you rank as a higher priority, training or technology?
I would say go hand in hand, because why the technology, that's a whole different group that's going to be working on that. The average user is not going to be part of purchasing that technology. So the user should be going for training, and they should be receiving that training, reading about it, and then it should be reinforced. And at the same time, in parallel, HR should be working with finance and should be working with IT folks to make sure that the best equipment is being purchased. Legal is involved, making sure that there's no restrictions there. So those teams should be working on purchasing equipment, and those same teams should be working on the training scenarios and the security awareness. Both in parallel, everybody working together. IT should be talking with HR on who are the right people to hire, whether it's the people on the cybersecurity side, the workers. It can't be in silos. Everybody needs to be working together. So I say it's important. Both are very important. Both will lead to vulnerabilities. Both can compromise. And it's something that can be tackled together and at the same time.
Okay. How has the evolution of ransomware tactics and techniques influenced the way that the FBI is going to approach combating the threats? And what types of advancements have been made by law enforcement to be able to stay ahead of these cyber criminals?
All right. What the FBI has done, because ransomware, the actors continue to evolve. They go from individuals just making ransomware and deploying it themselves to ransomware as a service where they're making it for other people and deploying it. They're using it and giving it to other people. And one of the ways to try to prevent this is having the antivirus and anti-malware detection on your system. So what that forces the cyber actors to do is to change the variant. So what that allow it to do is to, as they make their different tweaks and change like the hash so that it's not detected, new variants come out. So what we did at the FBI was we went to a model where every variant that is identified is assigned to a specific field office so that they become the subject matter expert. To get ahead of this, what we do is each office will create a list of questions, a questionnaire, so that, for example, if you're in Cincinnati, Ohio, and you have a ransomware attack, and you call the Cincinnati field office, they may not be familiar with that particular variant, but they can look and see who is, and it could be the Dallas, Texas office. So they'll look and see what the questionnaire is, and they'll ask, like, what file types do you see? Was there a ransomware note? Where did you find it? What did they say? So it'll be a whole list of questions that the Cincinnati office can ask that victim. and then package that information and provide that to the office that's working it, so that they have all that information and they can start seeing, are there a pattern, are there TTPs? So maybe the first 4 victims just provide information, but by the time the 10th, 11th, 12th victim is calling, we're able to give them information to help them get back online. And if you can help the community, that in turn can stop the bleeding and prevent the ransomware attackers from making the income that they expected to. And maybe that can kind of stifle that particular group. And then also that we can start identifying, based on the information we get from the different victims, who the actors are. And if they're in another country, leverage our contacts with our foreign partners to effect an arrest. So one of the things we did was, besides doing that, is looking at the ecosystem. You know, who's creating the malware, who's doing the ransomware, who's providing infrastructure. You know, sometimes it's a different group that creates the infrastructure. So we started looking at the ecosystem for ransomware, and as well as our approach to how we conduct investigations for ransomware.
Okay. That's interesting. So when, you know, an organization is a victim of ransomware and the data includes PII, is the automatic assumption that that data is compromised and it needs to be reported as a data leak or a data breach, where more communication with the end user needs to be either communicated or they need to be contacted, let them know that their data has been compromised?
We assume that their data has been compromised, and we also assume that the threat actor is still in that network, despite efforts by the organization to remediate. In terms of notifying, there was legislation that was proposed multiple times. To my knowledge, it hasn't been actually passed where they have to report that. But if we come across it during our course of our investigation, we will notify the victims. And then we work with our victim services. We have an obligation and mandated by the Department of Justice that if we identify victims, our victim services will work with them, one, notifying them of what we know, and then also just keeping, I want to say tabs, but follow up, because sometimes the victims, you know, be like, okay, we're used to PI, it was stolen. You know, some of us in the government, we expect it was stolen with the OPM breach years ago, but it doesn't make it any easier for the victims. So we want to make sure that, just like any other crime, that the victim is cared for.
Okay. And, you know, one of the statistics that I heard or through research was around double or triple extortion, as far as the way that once the bad actors do get hold of that data. Can you explain that in a little more detail?
Yes, because originally it was ransomware. They would encrypt your data, send you a ransom note, and tell you how much they wanted, and to release that data. Then they evolved to doing the double ransomware, where they would, one, encrypt your data, and then two, exfil it. So now they're giving you they're sending you the ransom note demanding payment to release the data on your system, so you can get back access and get back online. And then once they do that, the double is now they're going to charge you an amount of money to keep them from leaking that out to the public. As you know, companies are in the business, operate to make money. And if people lose confidence, they can lose customers and then lose money. So that is a viable threat, and that's the double extortion comes in, where they're now threatening to do so.
And typically, how does the FBI address that, the double extortion? Is there anything that can be done to help prevent that?
In terms of preventing, goes back to the cyber hygiene. It goes back to identifying the problem as soon as possible. And one of the things that we see when we try to talk to victims is not everybody has logging, right? So they don't keep logs, or they keep it for a very short amount of time. So they're not seeing what's being exfilled. They're not creating a baseline of what the normal activity looks like in a network. So without basic hygiene, the actor's gonna get in anyways, but it makes it easier for them, because if you make it hard for them, they'll pivot and find another victim. So may not necessarily prevent it, but it's having the things in place, which is the right appliances, having logging in place, and being able to sift those and knows what's normal and what's not normal traffic.
Okay. And if an agency or organization does pay ransom and they get their files unlocked, do you see an influx of other groups trying to exploit that and go immediately after that particular network and try and see if they can use either the same exploits or maybe a different exploit to hold their data ransom?
We've seen where a victim's been hit multiple times. Sometimes it's because they know that, or they're predicting that individual company might not have patched, and they're going to test that vulnerability. It's not anything that they're doing they're not working together. It's just a bad actor knows that there's a vulnerability out there and he's going to use it. And unfortunately, sometimes a victim can get hit more than once by different actors for the same vulnerability. Again, it goes back to how long it takes them to respond when it comes to patching, how long it takes them to remediate, and how long it takes them to put in mitigation controls in place.
Okay. And one of the areas that I'm most concerned with is, has artificial intelligence or machine learning, how has that changed the way that hackers are approaching these types of either malware or ransomware attacks? Is this something that is of concern of the FBI?
AI and what can be done with AI is a concern, and that's an area like everyone else we're looking into and trying to understand as it's being developed and being used more and more. But when it comes to the actors, just like us and anybody else that's curious or researchers, they're testing it and seeing what's the art of the possible with AI. In terms of them actually using it, how would we know that they actually used AI to create that message for that phishing, or if they use it to look at the code and help them build it faster or check for errors? I don't know at this point how we will be able to detect that. But I would tell people that have that concern, at the end of the day, maybe it means that they do it faster, create malware. But if you're not protecting yourself now, like, what's the difference? If you're not putting the hygiene and you're worried about AI, I think I wouldn't focus on AI. If it's definitely a good topic to learn, a lot of good books and blogs and white papers on AI. But I would tell people, stop, concerning about AI and just focus on doing the basic, because they're going to get you, anyway, the easiest way. And the easiest way has been working all along, which is, right now the people are getting hit today and got hit yesterday, and all that was without AI. It was just they didn't patch, or they didn't practice basic hygiene. Hygiene is not the end all be all, but it does make it harder. And like I said, actors, they don't want to work hard. They want to make money. So if they start running to roadblocks, they're just going to pivot and find an easier victim.
Okay. You might address this a little bit earlier, but what are the typical steps taken by the FBI in investigating ransomware attacks, and how can the victims best cooperate with law enforcement during these investigation processes? I know we mentioned a little bit about reporting to FBI and CISA, but are there certain things that an agency or an organization can do in advance as they're waiting for an FBI response to kind of help with the investigation process?
Yes, I would say they can help themselves by coming up with an incident response plan before something happens. And those discussions should include their legal counsel. We've mentioned several times that time is critical. There's a lot of time spent if this conversation hasn't taken place on, the network defender, the person behind the keyboard in the organization, they just want to get things back online and things running. But the legal may have other questions and concerns and can put the brakes on those type of efforts. So it's best to include them early so that they're familiar with the terms, they're familiar with what's taking place, they're familiar with what is going to be passed to law enforcement so that they're familiar with what law enforcement is going to ask of the victim. And that way, if there's any concerns on, for example, what the FBI is asking for, we can hash that out before an intrusion. So at the point of an intrusion, whether it's the CISO, the deputy, or someone in that chain of command should already know what can be passed and should be able to pass that immediately to law enforcement, whether it's CISO or the FBI or both, versus waiting for approval from legal. So I would say start there. And then as soon as they have something, immediately pick up the phone and say, okay, this is what we have. These are the ROCs. We think it's a China actor, or we know it's it's APT 29. We know a specific threat actor. That is very helpful. If there is a contract with a third-party vendor, letting us know, hey, we have a contract with this third-party remediation company, and getting approval to share that information. If we can see that report, even if it's in a draft, allow us to get a better understanding of what occurred, and then we can look through our own holdings to see what information we have that can enrich what the victim is already seeing or hasn't seen yet. So it's a before part of the planning, and then during is sharing, being transparent. I can tell you how many times working with companies where they say nothing happened, but then you show them, like, here's your exfil, and all this was exfiled at this date and this time, and they're like, then okay, yeah, it did happen. So being upfront, being honest. We're not regulators. You're not forced to cooperate with us. We're here to help. So being honest and being transparent is the best way for us to be able to help you.
Okay. And so it sounds like a lot of ransomware attacks may be underreported just because it's more of they don't want to admit that it's happened. Do you have any statistics on that?
I don't have the statistics because, we don't know what we don't know. So some don't want to report it because they don't know it's even going on. So then once everything is locked out, they've hired a company, they feel it resolved, and they say, okay, we have insurance, so we hired a company, we have them on retainer, let's just move on. Some don't want to do it because they feel that we're a regulator and we're going to report it, or they're going to be penalized for it. So there's several reasons why they don't, the numbers is underreported, but it's hard to put a finger on exactly what the actual number is. But as you can see from the numbers that keep growing for those that are reporting it, it's a lot.
Yeah, and the research, every day I get email alerts of a new company being hit, and that attack's probably happened weeks ago, but they're just starting to announce it today. So it's constantly, it's growing exponentially.
Yeah, and the attack could have happened weeks ago, but the intrusion probably happened months or two before, because what we see with some, especially the very sophisticated actors, they're going to get a foothold inside the network, and they're going to take a look and do an inventory and see what's of value. You have a PII that they can sell to one customer, right? They have trade secrets and other information they can sell to other customers. Sometimes they sell the same thing to multiple customers. So they may spend time in the network looking around to see what's of value. And then once they're done with that, or they feel that vulnerability is going to be disclosed, and then they enact the ransomware. So the actors could have been in there for a while.
Okay. And then are there developments in ransomware that the agency should be more vigilant about? I know we talked about patching vulnerabilities, understanding the assets, but are there other areas that, that you feel like maybe is, a common theme across the teams that you're investigating, post breach?
I would say, well, the themes are, it's usually the victim, user clicking, or could be where you have, the pirated connections where somebody wants to play video games at work. And so they create they log something into the network to get around whatever security controls are in place, or to get around software restrictions. So I'd say just categorizing what's the value. The IT folks should know what's on the network, prioritize it, what they have, making sure they have the anti-malware and antivirus, disabling the macros, doing whitelisting. Like, it's a defense in depth. It's like you have to put everything in place just to make it harder. Nothing's foolproof, but just to make it harder. But every victim, as we look across, is usually the common themes. One of the three ways they got in, and then how they were able to then lateral through the network, especially if it's a flat network.
Okay. So network segmentation would be an important aspect to be able to try and keep the lateral movement from really propagating across the network.
Yes. And having that network map, so if there is an intrusion, whoever's doing the remediation and law enforcement, we can have a look, goes to knowing what's on the network. But yes, if you can segment it, that's another way to create that the offense in depth. I'm not seeing a lot because it takes work, and sometimes they don't want to go through it and they figure that they'll just throw a firewall and then everything will be safe.
Okay. And then do you feel like agencies or organizations that rely too much on the cybersecurity insurance side, where they've got, they know that they're covered for payments if they need to, so they can they feel more comfortable without having that good cyber hygiene?
Yes, I see what they do is the bare minimum just to satisfy the requirements for the cyber insurance, and it's a false sense of security. What I realized a few years ago is I started getting fewer calls from victims, and started getting calls from legal representatives. And then when I tried to call them back, they wouldn't return the calls. So we started seeing is that one of the things was that they had to reach out to law enforcement. So they were putting the check mark that they made that phone call, but not providing any information and moving on. But not realizing that it's all in the fine print. Cyber insurance is just like any other type of insurance. It's out there for the company to make money. So they don't pay for everything. So you have to really see what it says. Is there any stipulations on how your stuff was configured? Did you have to have certain equipment? Did you have to have certain protocols in place? It was very important, when they buy the insurance, to read the fine print to see what's covered, what's not covered, and what can keep you from getting coverage on a particular cyber event.
Okay. I know we're running close to time. I believe you have to drop at 10 minutes of. I've got one last question, and then we'll see if there's any questions from the audience. But is there a time of year that is typically you see more of these attacks? September was one of the higher months in recent history. I'm not sure why September, but is there certain times of the year that you start seeing these happening more frequently?
I wouldn't say, I'm familiar with a particular time of the year. What sticks out to me is March, just because I start seeing the small mom and pop type firms that provide tax services. So it doesn't mean that March and April is a particular high time. It just sticks out to me where some of the smaller organizations tied to tax services are hit. Usually it's just tied to the vulnerabilities. What's out there? What's the latest vulnerability? They're testing these vulnerabilities. They're looking at other people, researchers that are testing it to see, what's out there, what's vulnerable, and how quick they can react. So, September, I don't know why that particular month was high. Maybe it's just the reporting. But the threat is ever present, is present every day. And they focus on doing the best they can to protect themselves.
Okay, I wasn't sure if it was, August, a lot of people take time off for vacation, including security teams. So maybe there's a less staff in that can catch these things as they happen, or around the holidays where people are trying to focus around family. So sometimes you just can't have the full staff that you want. So I was just curious if that was something that did come into play.
They do pay attention to holidays. They know the government works Monday through Friday. So that is something they're aware of. Just know that if you discover an intrusion on a weekend, call us. It's a 24/7 job for us, and we will have that conversation.
Okay. And then Heather, are there any questions from the audience?
I see one in the chat. It says, as AI is learning and becoming more human-like, whereby information for updates or how to fix it may appear sound, what is the FBI doing to keep up with AI and the new way that potential actors can abuse networks?
We talked briefly about AI. So what we're doing is we're trying to stay on top of what the latest developments are with AI and what the capabilities are. And when it comes to how they're able to use that, just continues to communicate to individuals on how to protect their networks, having the security awareness briefings, providing that to companies, being available for companies for TTXs, training exercises, letting them know that that's a good way to test the response plan and to make sure that everyone's on the same page, and we're happy to participate in those type of events.
Are there any other questions?
Jason, there's one more in the Q&A. I don't know if you want to scan that in case you want to take it offline or do it over the line.
I'll have to have our security team respond to that. Appreciate the question, so we'll respond to that directly. James, I really appreciate the time. Do you have any closing thoughts that you'd like the audience to kind of leave, with just having in the back of their mind is some best practices or some things to think about post this tech talk?
Keep educating yourselves, just like coming on this call, because hearing what's out there, it reinforces what you're learning with the security awareness training that you're getting from your companies. Continue to educate yourself on ransomware and the cyber hygiene. All that information has been out there for years. CISA has a great page where you can review that information, and there's Stop Ransomware. I encourage everybody to take a look at that, where you can get the cyber tips, as well as see latest information and to see if they have any advisories. Reach out to your local FBI field office, establish those contacts so that when you pick up the phone and call, and I will leave you that if somebody comes and say, hey, they're the FBI, you can always call the field office and say, hey, somebody just came by. And, if it's me knocking on your door, you can call the Washington field office and we say, hey, James Cheeks is here. He claims he's an FBI. And, they can give you the badge number and you can verify it that way. A lot of times, I'll send my agents to do a notification and we'll spend days of back and forth. Are you an FBI agent? Are you really an FBI agent? You tell them to call the FBI office. Time is critical, and it's good to be vigilant and watch for imposters, but just pick up the phone. You don't have to trust us with the number we're giving you. You can look online, call that FBI office, and verify that individual so that we can get you that information. We'll give you a teleporter link where we can send you that information so we can go out of band. So get to know your FBI office and have that as part of your response plan. And, thanks for inviting me together, working amongst yourselves, get to know not only the FBI, but your peers in the industry, because they may be seeing things. They have experts and people that you can talk to, bounce ideas and see, hey, what are you seeing? And sharing amongst yourselves is also a better way to protect yourselves.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate the time, Special Agent Cheeks. This was really informative, and I'm sure we'll have some additional questions. If our participants do have questions specific to this webinar, can they reach out to you directly?
Yes. I think
Okay.
I don't know if they had the email address on there, but yes, again, reach out to me directly, and then we'll see if we can get you the answers. Everybody stay safe, and I hope everybody has a great Thanksgiving that's coming around the corner.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. So hopefully Special Agent Cheeks was able to provide some valuable insight. We've got a couple of minutes left, and I just wanted to go into high level how ServiceNow can help protect and also plan for the post ransomware attack, because it's not a matter of if, but it's really going to be when. So as he mentioned, assets are a major concern. So you can't protect what you don't know or in your environment. So having a good understanding of where your assets are, what's on them is vitally important. Also having processes and a plan. So, it comes back down to people, process, and technology, but having a process that you can follow, as part of that planning phase is vitally important. And that could be, making sure that you have the contact information for the field office for the FBI. Hopefully you never need to use it, but having that there is vitally important. And then also, start understanding what, your business criticality is and your recovery point and recovery time objectives. So if you do face a ransomware attack, you can't decrypt it and you can't pay the ransom. How much data can you afford to lose? How long can the system be down before it impacts the overall business? Knowing what those are up front also helps makes these decisions a little bit easier in advance, because you don't want to have to do this when it's already too late. And then when it comes down to protection, so you have to have controls, really the controls, and then test those controls with simulated attacks, so you can understand where there might be gaps, and you can monitor risk indicators to gain insight on the potential risks. It give you your data so you can help prioritize and respond to different threats, because they're coming in different ways. They're using phishing, they're using RDP, they're using vulnerabilities. Having a clear picture of which ones risk indicators are out there is going to be vitally important. And then make sure that you're monitoring everything so you understand what anomalies are. And then when it comes to the response side, it's really around planning and managing response operations. These can't happen on the fly. So if you're trying to put a response plan together post-breach, it's already too late. So have that out, have it tested, and make sure that you have a plan. And automation is a great a great way to make sure that you can cut out some of the noise, but then also make sure that you have the right types of security events bubbling up to the right people. Have a communication plan. As as Agent Cheeks mentioned, legal might need to be involved. There may be different groups within the organization that needs to be part of these conversations. HR, these are all areas that I think some some agencies are looking at, but others may be missing. And then, how do you restore the systems? What's the process? And what type of, what is your business continuity plan? And then very similar to, say, NIST 861 around the adapt. So hopefully you get lessons learned. So when you do see an attack or an attempted attack, you're able to take and start identifying what the root cause was. Was it successful? Was it not successful? If it was successful, how can we help harden our security posture? So really being able to have that type of methodology, so you're continuously improving the security posture over time, will certainly make it easier to prevent these attacks. There's nothing that can, there's no foolproof or silver bullet that can stop a ransomware attack. But if you could be as proactive and make sure you have the good, clean cyber hygiene, understand your assets, and test and find where you're weak, that will go a long way. And then for those in the government and even a commercial space, it really ties back down to zero trust architecture, because you're looking at, identity, making sure the right people are on the network, the right devices are on the network, where they are, the network itself, making sure that that's secure, all your applications, and then the data. All these things come into place, and as Agent Cheeks had mentioned, network segmentation, that's a key component for zero trust. Asset discovery is a key component for zero trust. So a lot of the zero trust methodologies and pillars can help with the mitigation or the reduction of risk for zero-day ransomware, just good, clean cyber hygiene. So these are areas that I think are very vitally important, and the ServiceNow platform can kind of help bring all that information in so you can make more informed decisions. So in conclusion, are there any other questions, I think, for the ServiceNow team? I think that's a no. So thank you so much for attending this. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully it opens up conversation and dialogues back with your teams. And if you have questions for Special Agent Cheeks, his contact information is here. It'll also go out in a email that we send out post Tech Talk, and then my contact information is here as well too. But as Agent Cheeks said, wish you a happy Thanksgiving. Hope everything goes well. But you make sure that you're planning, and hopefully, you're able to stay ahead of these types of attackers. Again, appreciate the time. If there's no last questions, I think we can end this Tech Talk.